Hey, BookTube, Chelsea, the Reading Outlaw here to do another book wrap up for you guys. I really like the 5-book format, but it definitely means sometimes I have to stay on top of it when I'm reading a lot of books really quickly. This is the wrap up for books number 21 through 25. I've read in 2017. The first one is that I really liked that I read as part of my Chelsea Catches Up for the Hugos project, and that is Roses and Wrought by Kat Howard. This book is so fucking gorgeous, you guys. Kat Howard does prose so lush and vivid and real that even though it's about something I usually don't care about, I loved it. This book is about the fae. It's about fairies, but it did the thing that I like, where it did the dark fairy thing. Like, it talked about fairy tales. It talked about how the fact that a lot of fairy tales have very violent, angry roots. And so these fairies are like beautiful and majestic, but awe-inspiring in like the traditional sense of like awe, like awful. Like they are mythic and they are badass and they are not fucking around. And it's about art and inspiration and what you trade for your art and family and motherhood. It does a really good kind of spin on its own version of the evil stepmother. The ways that she's evil are far more real, but like this book is just so good that even though it's about the fae, which is not usually something I'm down for, I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. Definitely check out Kat Howard and some of her shorter work too if you're kind of on the fence about it. The next book was a podcast read. It was Foreigner by CJ Cherry. We read this for the Magical Space Pussycats. 1 star. Didn't like it. Tune into the podcast to find out why. Boring. Where the fuck was the science fiction in that book? Moving on. Book number 23 is Stolen Innocence. This one's got a long subtitle, so I apologize for reading it. My story of growing up in a polygamous sect, becoming a teenage bride, and breaking free of Warren Jeffs by Alyssa Wall. This one is one of those ones with a very self-explanatory title and subtitle. This book I found via a Book Riot piece that I'll link down below that literally was like a list of 100 great cult memoirs. And hi, if you've been here for any length of time at all, you know that I have a special soft spot in my heart for nonfiction that's related to cults. And especially like ones that are also memoir based. So I have read obviously lots about the FLDS and Warren Jeffs and the polygamous side of the fundamentalist Mormon faith. Escape by Carolyn Jessup is one of my favorite books to recommend to people who are just getting into nonfiction because it's such a fascinating story. This one is very much so in the same vein. There is a lot of overlap between these very prominent families, the Jessup family, the Wall family, the Jeffs family. There's a lot of intermarriage and overlapping there. But this was, of course, always another fascinating read, an interesting read into how people involved in things like polygamy and things like cult-based religions get involved, stay involved, and perpetuate the future involvement of others. So I really liked that Alyssa was able to talk about some of those things, although, you know, in terms of the actual like storytelling, prose, writing content of the book, it was good. It was decent. It was about the same as a lot of the other memoirs I've read in similar subjects. It's not to knock it in any way. It just didn't stand out in terms of the functional delivery of such an engaging story. Book number 24, Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This is another podcast read, this time for Sisterhood of the Traveling Paperbacks. This one I liked way more than I liked Foreigner. I still didn't love it. It was like a 3.5 star book. It's vampires, so yeah, I feel about vampires the same way I feel about fairies, which is like, whatever, it's fine, it's not really my jam. But at least these vampires are bloody and violent and like kick ass. It's not gratuitous, there's nothing that felt unnecessary or just violent to be violent, but it is a violent book because the vampires are not fucking around. It also does some really cool things with like Aztec and Mexican history and folklore, mixing it with vampirism and kind of contrasting that with some of the Western mythos that's been created about vampires and where those two things differ. Sylvia Moreno Garcia is another one of these people like Kat Howard who has such beautiful writing and is able to craft such a fantastic story that even though it's not something I would normally necessarily have considered myself interested in, I really enjoyed the books as a whole. So the last book for this wrap up is number 25, Sisters-in-Law, How Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg Went to the Supreme Court and Changed the World by Linda Hirschman. This one is a little bit older. It's not quite fully up to date. It doesn't, bring us current with like Scalia's passing and all of those things, but it does cover all the way up through Elena Kagan's appointment to the Supreme Court and how there are now 3 female sitting Supreme Court justices. But really what this book does is it looks at the history of women's rights and liberties in this country in the modern era through the lens of the 2 people who most prominently secured those rights via like legal legislation. And that is Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor. It's fascinating because, like, I know a lot about Ruth Bader Ginsburg because she's, like, kind of a hero of mine, but I didn't know as much about Sandra Day O'Connor. Admitting my own bias is mostly because Sandra Day O'Connor is a Republican, was a Republican sitting justice, was appointed by a Republican president in a Republican court. So a lot of the things not related to women's rights that she had to say were not necessarily ones that I personally agreed with, and her personal story is not one that spoke to me as much as it did Ruth Bader Ginsburg's, but I will admit I have kind of seen the light. I have come around. The things that both of these women were able to accomplish on behalf of other women and to legislate into standing order some of the rights that women have, like, it just gave me such chills of, like, these women coming into these male-dominated spaces and laying it down and saying no more and fighting and fighting and fighting and all of the shit that they had to overcome. And yeah, it makes it really depressing to think about. And the book kind of unfortunately ends on a little bit of a downer note that there are a lot of those same laws that are now being challenged and stripped away and reconstituted that we're continually having to relook at. But there are women in the highest court in the land sitting who care. And that's it, at this particular point in our political climate and timeline, just the reaffirmation that there are people who care above you, who have the power to fight the fight, is a really nice feeling. Not to mention, I mean, notorious RBG for life. So I really loved this book. It was really, really wonderful to read. I really liked listening to it on audio. I feel like that helped me absorb a lot of the details without getting mired down in some of the more particulars of the case law that the book covers. But if you have any interest in how the Supreme Court functions, how women's history has functioned in America from like a legal standpoint, this is definitely one to check out, and I could not more highly recommend it. And that's it. That's this section of 5 books. That brings us almost current with actually all the things I've currently read. There will probably be another one of these videos coming to you guys before too long, as I stay on top of the ball. As always, comment down below. Let me know what you've read. If you've read any of these, you can like, you can subscribe, you can hit me up all over social media so we can talk all about books. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Have happy reading.